No worries. I actually, I'm gonna post a picture of my, hey Cora, I'm gonna post a picture of my dinner later, which is just a bunch of Redmond salt. I posted a picture of my lunch earlier. North Carolina, what's up? I
Well,
went to UNC Chapel Hill.
I brought
Uh,
my dinner with me, so I've got a bowl with salt with more
no,
salt in it.
nice, nice, cool. I love that. I love that. I actually have one of those rocks. I have like over here like a bowl made of salt with like little salt rocks in it that's a lamp. It's
Oh,
really
very
cool.
nice.
But yes, I do love, I've been to Redmond down to the mines and everything. It's amazing. Pennsylvania, what's up? I used to live in the Philly area. Love the salt and toothpaste, someone said. Nice, nice. Yeah, you guys make awesome products. I got to know Tu and Julie and all that. Like we used to have the parties with Redmond at all these conferences when we had conferences, but
I want to be
unfortunately,
nice. I want to be nice to do that again.
none of those are happening anymore. But yeah, my lunch was peak tea, and my dinner is going to be Redmond salt. I got a box from you guys, and it was amazing with like all kinds of like the garlic salt, the lemon pepper salt, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. And I actually was like literally today like going through like all of them and just doing this like it actually really helps on your fast. It's kind of amazing. Like just having something like that. Like I found like the hot tea and just also having like some salt like just to throw in your mouth. I actually like kind of eating it, and especially with like a few of the other herbs like garlic. It's pretty tasty.
And it's really satisfies, when our bodies are low on water and on food and on salt. Actually, a little bit of salt tastes very sweet, actually, because there are little less hunger pains.
Are you still there? Oh,
Can you not hear me
yeah,
anymore?
yeah. Yeah, I can hear you now. I think it just
Oh,
went for a second. But I heard you said that that salt is sweet. I do notice that. Why do you think that is?
well, as our bodies are pretty smart, as you know, and it craves water when we're thirsty. So when we're low on water,
Mhm.
we get thirsty. And so when our bodies get low on salt, we'll actually crave salt. A lot of people think that they're craving sugar or potato chips or French fries, but actually our bodies are low on sodium, which is an essential part of our bodies. And so our bodies will crave that sodium. And sometimes we misplace that craving for sugar, or we might misplace it for a craving of potato chips or French fries,
Totally.
but we're really craving that beautiful salt crystal. And when we're low on salt, it'll taste sweet. And the more we eat, the more salty it'll taste until, same thing with water, right? That first drink after a 24-hour water fast or something. And it's just amazing how that water just is so satisfying. After you drink a lot of water, it's not as satisfying because our levels are back up, and salt works the same way.
Totally agreed. I actually, so Shelly just asked the favorite flavor of salt. I think my favorite one of yours is the garlic pepper salt. It's a blend of all of them, and it's really amazing. I love it. I was just like on that one and the lemon pepper salt. Like those are
Those are
both
my two
really good.
favorites.
Yeah,
Yep.
yes, those are tasty. Someone, Avanya S. Graham says yes, she's down with it. So, I'm actually in going to do real salt chef. Yes, I'm going to be doing. I use garlic pepper on mostly everything. Agreed. Like the garlic flavor is awesome.
And it's
I'm
garlic is a great. There's a lot of health properties of garlic as well. So
100%, 100%. Yeah, totally amazing. So I'm doing 72 hours, and this is 24 hours in now. Some people are 48 hours in. Like, I've got my tips from my book, The Energy Formula, but I'm curious, like, from your end, what are some of like the top things that you hear and that you say to your community with the Redmond fasting community that's on Facebook in particular, as well as this one here?
yeah, that's a great question. I think whether you're at 24 hours or 48 hours, either one of those are pretty good milestones. As you know, when we quit eating foods and the carbs drop, our glycogen levels start to go down. And we have about, and you probably could correct me if I'm wrong, but usually about 2 to 3 grams of water attached to each gram of glycogen. And so
Yep.
as our bodies drop in our carbs, we start to lose glycogen through the liver, and we start to deplete that. When we do, we're losing lots of fluid. And a lot of that keto flu, or that first 24-hour flu-like symptoms, whether we're fasting or we've switched to a keto diet, a lot of that comes with the body flushing. And so we're losing glycogen, we're losing fluids. And if you've ever tasted your sweat or your tears or your urine, it's all salty. And so as we're losing all that fluid, we're flushing salts. And so if you are doing a fast and you're drinking fluids, which for any extended fast, you need to do that for sure, we need to replace the salts in addition to just the water, or we have all kinds of problems. And so oftentimes, if you add a little bit of salt to your water, or you suck on a piece of salt like I just did and let it dissolve in your mouth, a lot of that craving, a lot of that nausea, a lot of that sickness goes away, because we're boosting back those fluids and the lost electrolytes. And then the salt itself is quite satisfying.
100%. So even like as a keto dieter, like when I'm feeling brain fog, and hey, yeah, come back to Brazil. I will, hopefully when travel allows. What's up, Darius? Yeah, that for me, whenever I have salt, like it can help me with that brain fog I'm feeling. Like you said, like a lot of times it isn't like the calories, or even, needing to have carbohydrate, or even, some high fat, ketone sustaining type foods. For me, it's like just sometimes it's just salt. And I've also noticed with studies that there's a number of like ergogenic compounds like used with athletes, that a lot of times it's, sodium citrate, or, sodium phosphate, or sodium bicarbonate. And I've always wondered, like, well, how much of that's the sodium? Like a lot of times for like athletes, like, and keto dieters tend to be hyponatremic, tend to be low on salt. And I get such a boost from it, like whenever I have it. Like I said, whenever I'm feeling that brain fog or fatigue, like that's where I go first. And then I can see whether it's maybe something else. But typically that's it.
I think that's really smart. And even there was a great book, it was written years ago by a Dr. Batman-Gelly, and some people love him and some people don't. But one of his things he used to say all the time is, you're not sick, you're thirsty.
Mm-hmm.
And, oftentimes we're not low on ibuprofen. And so instead of, if we do have a headache, there's a place for that for sure. I'm not dissing any type of medicine, but oftentimes if we have a headache coming on, if we would reach to a good tall glass of clean water with salt added to it, oftentimes, because our body fluids, if you looked at the breakdown of the ratio of the intercellular and extracellular fluids, it's mostly sodium chloride, and then you've got potassium chloride and magnesium chloride and calcium chloride. But when our bodies are low on any of those, all kinds of stuff starts to go out of balance, which is why when you go to the hospital, the first thing they're going to do is give you an IV of saline solution, which is salt water. So it's not the salt that's the problem. It's the terrible foods that are put on salt. And then it's the processed salt that is so prevalent in all of our foods today. Most people probably get more salt from their processed foods than they do, salting their food at the kitchen table. And so as somebody switches to a natural diet and eats more fresh foods, their salt consumption is going to drop a lot. And so you've got to replace that with good, clean, healthy salt, not the processed, demineralized salt that we can talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah, I'd actually love to get into that. I saw a question before about, does the garlic break the fast? And that is such a nuanced thing, and I think people get so tight, or I don't know what the word is, like militant almost, about like what breaks a fast and the concern over that. And I am actually someone that I think there's a lot of power in fasting, and the biggest power of it isn't weight loss or even autophagy. It's just willpower and tapping into your mental strength and fortitude, and seeing that you can in fact do this. And when you do this and people tell you it's impossible, that you can in fact do anything. And that's what's like
I
the
love
most
that.
powerful thing. And if you having some bone broth, or you having some MCTs, or you having some exogenous ketones, or you having, whatever it is, some collagen or something, if that in your coffee, or if that gets you like another 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, awesome. Like that's awesome. Like you don't have to like worry about breaking a fast, or does this stop my autophagy? It's not like an on-off switch that like you get zero autophagy and then, max autophagy. Like you might reduce autophagy for a little bit, but you're getting no calories in and you're moving around, and you'll get back to maximizing autophagy and fat loss and ketones very quickly. It's not like it's just all or nothing and it's broken and, you're screwed. It just seems like crazy to me. And exercise actually raises autophagy. So it's not just like I have to be so deep into this fast and I can't have any possible thing ever, or else it doesn't count. Like that just seems crazy to me. Like those are rules that you're making. Like it doesn't have to be that way. Like it doesn't have to be. I think another big part of fast, like religiously, historically, is finding ways to unplug, to take it down, to get into the parasympathetic nervous system, to meditate. I think fasting is so tied to religion and tied to meditation and tied to epiphanies and spiritual serendipity and, all these things, that like it's so important that we actually relax and chill out. And then to turn fasting into like something that's like upsetting, or it has to be perfect, or, it's only this way and that's the way it counts. I mean, that's not helpful or ideal. I mean, what do you deal with this discussion a lot?
I 100%, everything what you've just said. And I think for me, I find that when I get into that, 48-hour period, I get a lot more mindful. For me, it's really easy. For some reason, when I'm up on that 24, I
Yeah.
find that I've got to be a little more careful around my kids, because I might be a little short
Yeah.
with them. I might be a little more snippy in that
Yeah.
24-hour period. But once I cross that 24 and I'm going into 36 and 48, I
That's
find
it.
that it's so much easier to be mindful and more thoughtful, aware, in tune.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the right words to use there, but for me, the first 24 is really, I don't want to say easy, but quite, comparatively for me, it's a lot easier. And then I start to get really, the hangry phase kind of goes in
Yeah.
around that, 24 to, 28
Yeah.
hours, that, and then I'm able to, kind of recenter when I cross that line, and using salt and I like black coffee, and a little black coffee with salt in it just really works well for me. And I know some people don't use coffee at all in their fast, and some do. And I think it doesn't have to be quite as, like you said, militant or black and white that we sometimes like to make fasting. And I think it's more sustainable. I think if we can do it our way, we can do it more often, and we don't have to beat ourselves
That's
up
it.
emotionally or mentally.
That's it. And then, yeah, you don't want to turn the fast into something that you're dreading. It should be like an exploration of self and willpower. And you can say, like, I can do this. I can do this more often. What else can I do? And I can do this to maximize autophagy, or to have a time where you're in extended post-absorptive state, like where you are parasympathetic, where you are repairing and giving the gut a break. I mean, it's not just autophagy, you're also giving the gut like a chance to heal itself from all the crap that you're always eating and, putting in yourself. So it's just a nice chance to take a break. I have a question for you. You were mentioning before, like I'm curious about the differences, like you said, of what is the difference with Redmond, like real salt versus, just the typical salt that you would get in a salt shaker, the white salt at the store. Like, is it just, oh, it's pink and that's the big difference? I mean, what is the difference?
Great question. So any salt today, regardless of where it comes from, can be defined as sea salt. And I give presentations to college kids and high school kids, and even everybody in between. And I'll say, who has heard that sea salt's better? And almost everybody raises their hand. And 30, 40 years ago, that might have been the case. But today, if you buy sea salt at the grocery store and you look at the label, you might have a bigger ingredient list and more chemicals listed on a sea salt than you do on the salt in the blue canister with the umbrella right next to it. And so sea salt, first off, doesn't really mean anything anymore. And the second, you know, all salt comes from a seabed at some point. It might come from the current ocean, like the San Francisco Bay, the Gulf of Mexico, the Sea of Japan. It might come from a dead sea, like the Dead Sea in Israel or the Great Salt Lake here in Utah. Or it might come from an ancient seabed, a seabed that was laid down long ago. And there's a few of these seabeds. The real salt, the Redmond real salt, comes from a seabed in Utah. There's a very similar deposit in Bolivia, and there's a similar deposit in Pakistan. And so these are ancient seabeds that were laid down long ago. Now, before we had the refrigerator, all of us would have eaten more salt because we would have eaten it on our kimchi, on our sauerkraut, on our pickles, on our preserved meats. Everything would have been preserved outside of season with salt. Once we got the refrigerator and we got all these, you know, chemical preservatives, that all changed. But today, when you look at salt, salt can either come from a current ocean, like the San Francisco Bay, Gulf of Mexico. The water in the ocean occurs at about 3% sodium and chloride. Our bodies are 0.9%. So when we jump in the ocean, it stings our eyes because it's 3 times saltier than our bodies are. If you take saline solution and put it in your eye or in an IV, there's no sensation because it's the same as our bodies, and the ocean has gotten saltier. But seawater can only hold 26% sodium and chloride. Then once it gets more saline or more salinity than that, then the salt falls out of suspension on the bottom of the pond. So one of the ways you can make salt, and the way salt's been made for since the dawn of time, like the gray salt, the Celtic salt still made that way, is you pull the water off the coast of Brittany, France, you put it in a clay-lined pond, you put clay at the bottom because if you don't, the water just seeps into the ground. So you line it with clay. The clay doesn't let the water or the salt get away, and then it starts to evaporate. And the water goes from 3% to 4, 5, 6, 7, 22, and then eventually at 22, the salt crystals fall out of suspension onto the bottom. You rake those up. It brings up the little gray clay particles, which is why the Celtic salt is gray or the Hawaiian red salt is red from the red clay ponds. And the salt's its whole complete particle. When you look at salt in the ocean, salt doesn't occur as pure sodium and chloride. There's sodium chloride, potassium chloride, magnesium chloride, iodine, zinc, selenium. I mean, one of the reasons why kelp or seaweed is rich in iodine is because iodine is rich in the oceans. So seafood and you know, kelp and dulse are rich in iodine because it's in the seawater. And so you take all of that salt as a whole, and it's very different than if you, so that's how you can make it. Now, you also, in the turn of the century, companies realized that they could take that seawater and they could move it from pond to pond. And so they could bring the seawater into the first pond, put a different membrane or liner down, pull off the magnesium chloride, take it to the next pond, pull out the potassium chloride, the next time calcium chloride. And so now you've taken this whole complete salt with trace amounts of these other minerals, like you'd get in an IV, like of lactated ringers, which is sodium chloride, calcium chloride, potassium chloride, magnesium chloride. But now you just have the sodium chloride because you pulled out the potassium, which is essential for the sodium potassium pump. You pull out the calcium and the magnesium, which are essential for the balancing the electrolytes. So that's one big problem. A lot of processed salts today have those other key electrolytes extracted. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, the part that I think is probably even more problematic is salt is hygroscopic. Salt sucks water out of the air. So this crystal in a humid day gets wet. That makes the salt clump when it's in the shaker. So to stop that, salt companies came up with a list of chemicals they could add to the salt to stop the ability of the salt to attract moisture. The challenge is that salt's job in the body is to balance fluids and moisture in the body. So if you take this crystal that's supposed to balance moisture and you coat it with sodium ferrocyanide, calcium silicoaluminate, all these different, you know, tricalcium phosphate, these other chemicals that stop, it's like antiperspirant. You stop the salt's ability to attract moisture, and then you eat it and wonder why you've got water retention and blood pressure problems.
Yeah. I remember like in the old days, we used to put like little rice grains in the salt shaker to actually pull the moisture out so that the salt wouldn't clump.
Yep. And you're much better off doing that. And so if your salt doesn't clump, you might want to find a different salt. Now, with the exception of, you know, one of the nice things about a larger salt crystal, so this is, you can't see it in my bowl here. I've got the coarse salt, which you can put
Mm-hmm.
in a salt grinder, or the
Yep.
kosher size crystal, which is a little bit larger. Those larger particles don't clump together as much because they don't have as much surface area exposed. So the finer the salt particle, the more the
Right.
salt's going to clump. And so the finer, like table salt size, is where the salt manufacturers will typically add the anti-caking
Mm,
agents to it, because you don't typically see it in the kosher or the coarse salt.
got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. That's really good to know. And I actually have another question too, is I just got the 𝐅𝐢𝐧𝐝 in this package, and I haven't even looked at it yet. I'm a formulator, so I'm excited to try this.
That
But
one?
can you tell me, yeah, can you tell me what's in it actually? Like what was the formulation and what's the thought process behind it?
Yeah, so for years we've used salt for ourselves as athletes. I'm an avid mountain biker. I love to ski. I used to run a lot till I got into mountain biking. And salt on a long run with a big glass of water is just essential for your cramps. You know, it keeps you energized, just essential. And so for years, we would take salt with us ourselves on long runs, on long bike rides. My sister was a forest fighter with the Forest Service for a while, and she would always take salt with her, and just would take one of these little pocket shakers. You know, as you're out there on the trail, you feel a leg cramp coming up, you just
Yeah.
put a little bit of this salt under your tongue, and it solves the problem. Well, for kids and for high school teams and for soccer teams, you know, that's just not as convenient. And so as I would give classes years ago, I recommended to people, you know, avoid the sugar sports drinks. They're clear full of
Mhm.
sugar, they're clear full of artificial colors and flavors, and just a bunch of crap, and you don't get very good salt with it. So I would tell people, forget that, make your own. And the best recipe, and I still take it on bike rides, is a quart of clean water, a quarter teaspoon of real salt, a squeeze of lemon, a little bit of honey if you want some sweetener, or throw in some stevia or whatever. And that is an incredible sports drink, but it's still kind
Yeah.
of a pain. And so over the years, people have said, hey, you know, we love the formula. We like to make it ourselves, but can you just put it in a stick pack to make it super easy when I'm on the trail? And so that's what, you know, kind of brought about 𝐅𝐢𝐧𝐝. And so this is just real salt with a little bit of some other electrolytes. So I've added some extra calcium, some extra magnesium, some extra potassium. Years and years ago, people ate a lot more foods rich in potassium, which is essential, a lot more foods rich in magnesium, which is essential. But now we're starting to get a lot less of those in our diets. And so because we're not eating as many foods rich in potassium, we need to go out of our way to make sure we do that. But because a lot of people don't, we throw in 500 milligrams of potassium, and then
Oh,
60
nice.
milligrams of magnesium in here as well. So it's just a really clean electrolyte mix, and you can add a scoop to a glass of water. You can add it to a water bottle. It comes in a jar form as well as stick packs for on the go. Comes in several flavors. We have one that's unsweetened, so you can just, you know, add that to your coffee, or just, it makes the water taste soft and doesn't really
Mhm.
taste salty in my opinion, but it's kind of like soft water. But then we also add stevia with some flavor. So we've got this is a berry flavor. We have a lemon lime, and then a pina colada, and they're just a natural flavor with a little bit of stevia, to give you that, you know, extra, you know, flavor.
We're getting some Redmond love here with I need to get it, and talking about the 𝐅𝐢𝐧𝐝 and then saying that Redmond tastes really amazing and is different. I agree. And then someone saying, please save this live. That's amazing. Um, so yeah, like how how long do you typically fast, and like what do you think? Like with the crowd you've had, love the berry, someone said, by the way. Like, I mean, I do intermittent fasting quite a bit. I do like a 16 and 8 normally, and I like to do it with my circadian rhythm, the sleep wake cycle. So my eating window is from like 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. With the daylight. You know, there's actually data from Dr. Sachin Panda that talks about that that's the ideal fasting window, because sorry, the eating window, and you want to be fasting when it's dark out, because we're not nocturnal, and because eating can essentially turn on the circadian rhythm and wake us up. And so I try and keep to that window. But I also have been throwing in extended fasts from time to time. I now like this idea of doing like 1 to 3 days, like maybe a month. And 3 days is harder. But I too, I meant to mention this before. Like, it's funny, your exact timeline feels like my exact timeline, because the first 24 hours, like you said, it's not hard for a while, and then right now for me, like 24 hours in, I'm starting to feel it, which is why I actually like starting it at night after dinner, because like right now I'm starting to feel it, and I'm getting very hungry, but then I'll just go to bed. And usually it's like that 36-hour mark, like I really start turning a corner. And like you said, like 48 hours, like I'm feeling amazing. And it's so crazy that, the last time I did a 3-day one, which I've been exploring now, I felt so good. Like I had to break it because my mom was in town, and I had planned like to do dinner with her and the whole thing. But I was like, man, I feel like I could go like actually more days. And like everyone's like, are you crazy? Like this is insane. Like, and this is what I'm saying. Like they're like 24 hours, I'd be on the floor, I'd be dead. Like I hear this all the time. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. Like your body is literally meant to do this. Like we used to starve a lot. We used to like struggle to find food. Food wasn't in the convenience store, in the vending machine, Grubhub, Uber Eats, in our pantry, full refrigerator. It used to be hard to get food. It used to be hard to cook it, to make it, to prepare it, to hunt it, whatever. It was hard to get food. So we used to go a day, 2 days, 3 days without eating normally. And then people would go a week when they're looking for spiritual clarity or whatever. So it's like, but now it's like we go 12 hours and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And it's so funny, like where things are at now. And I'm curious, like from both your experience and then like with the crowd that you work with, like what's kind of like, how often and how long are the fasts typically?
I think it's such a personal thing. And I
Yeah.
think I'm listening to your body talk. For me, I really enjoy the intermittent fasting. I've tried a lot of different things. I grew up fasting religiously or for religion as a kid. So, 24-hour fasts weren't that new to me.
Right.
But for me, the intermittent fasting thing was, but I just really feel better when I get up and I'll have black coffee with salt. And maybe I'll even have another, cup, 1 to 2 cups of that. And I get so focused in what I'm doing. For me, it's really easy to lose track of the day. And so I'll typically do that in the morning. And then by 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'm ready for dinner. And then I'll eat. And then, by 8 o'clock, I'm done for the night. And so I typically eat most of my calories, typically between about 6 and 8 in the
So you're
evenings.
doing OMAD, like one meal a day?
Generally, yeah.
Okay. So how, like, do
Um,
you get in enough calories like that? Like you must have a big meal.
Yeah, I do. I eat, quite a bit that one time. But what's interesting is even with that is you just feel full faster. And so I'll eat. My wife laughs at me. I'll usually have dinner like at 6 o'clock, and then by 6:30 I'm eating again, and then by 8 I'm eating again. And so usually when I eat at 6, she's like, "Hey, how's your breakfast?" Um,
Ah,
so,
nice. Okay.
but
Well, that makes
for me
sense. I
that
mean, you
works.
got to get in your 2,000 to 2,500 calories or whatever. So you're packing it all
Um,
in that period of time.
Yeah, but it's not something I just follow exactly, because I mountain bike a lot. So if I go for a big
Hmm.
long mountain bike ride, I'll take calories with me. I love apples when I ride. It gives me good energy, and apples and salt when I'm on a bike ride. I love that. And so that certainly changes on days when I'm doing long bike rides. If I'm just going for a couple hours, I just water and salt it. But
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Someone says, I want to start fasting now. Well, jump in. You can jump in. You go to ShawnWells.com/challenge. We are about 24 hours in, but I'm going for another 48. And I've made this actually to your point, Darryl. We made it so that it's 24, 48, or 72, whatever works for you. Like because I want to do 72 and I want to encourage people to go the distance as well. I think it's amazing if you do. Like it really can be a massive breakthrough, like we talked about, like where you get that clarity, that energy. But at the same time, going back to my original point of it being such a big deal to get just to a certain point willpower wise. To like if someone's only gone 12 hours almost their whole life, like that's the longest they've gone, to go 24 hours is a really big deal. And I think like that should be supported and cheered and lifted up. And so I'm excited, like if someone just does 24, again, I don't want to be all militant and like, you know, it's kind of like that autophagy thing, or does that break your fast? And here's all the rules and you got to go 72. Like, I just want people to just learn that they can do this, and this is what is actually healthy for their body, along with having the salt, and you know, to actually grant themselves some grace in this process and not make it such a negative thing. What do you think?
Totally agreed. And I think a lot of times, even just a 1-day fast, even going to intermittent fasting is a big step. You know, just, you know, getting up in the morning and just not eating until dinner and see how you do. And then try the next day, go to bed, wake up and skip breakfast, and then just go all the way to dinner and get a full 24 in. And then, so yeah, I don't think it has to be as militant. I think starting where we're at, and I think even long term, it's different for everybody because everybody's bodies are different, and you know, some people's blood sugar acts really different on fasting than others. And so I think, you know, work with your healthcare professional, work with your life or your fitness or your health coach, and then work your way into it. And I think you'll find what works really well for you. And it may be the you know, a 10-10, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can fast.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I just saw someone said they lost 100 pounds and they've been doing fasting. That is amazing. I'm super proud of you for doing that. That's incredible. I see someone says, I never have breakfast. Interesting word, break fast. I love to think about that because you're literally breaking that fast of sleeping. But honestly, breakfast is whenever you do break the fast. So it doesn't have to be in the morning. Your break fast can be at noon, or for you, it, like your wife says, it's 6 p.m. And that actually makes sense. That's when you're breaking your fast.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's such, you know, growing up, I always, you know, breakfast is the important meal of the day. And then all the diners, the lunch is the most important meal of the day. And then all your restaurants, dinner is the most important meal of the day. And so we've come to think that we've just got to eat all the time. But if you go back to any culture, you know, humans have not had instant abundance of high calorie, high sugar, high processed food. And it's just not, it's not led to anything good. If you watch animals in nature and they listen to their bodies and they eat, you know, sometimes, but they're not, you know, eating all of the time, you know, and even those, you know, herbivores that do, it's just a very different stomach than we have. We don't have, you know, we're not cows, so we don't need to be grazing all day.
Ruminant. Yeah, exactly. A couple questions. One, well, first, I know as a dietitian and sports nutritionist and biochemist, like that it frustrates me when people say salt is unhealthy because of these studies that are epidemiological where they correlated processed food that had high salt with negative health effects. But when you actually went back to these epidemiologic studies like NHANES and whatever, and you teased out the processed food, then you saw like salt was correlated with longevity, as it's always been throughout history. Like salt was salary, you know, like it was something that, you know, literally soldiers would, you know, take salt tablets, and, you know, salt has always been a big deal for health. But then, you know, is this period of time like where we also started to believe that fat was bad for us. And all of this data was so wrong and so correlative, but not actually causative. And it's so frustrating that all this data is out there. But someone was asking the question about blood pressure. And I'm just curious from your perspective, like the negatives of salts and even this blood pressure stuff.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when on these Haines studies, actually, I brought the study with me. It's actually right here. This was the original study. It was called Evidence for the Relationship Between Sodium Chloride Intake and Human Essential Hypertension. And so when they did the study, they used copious amounts, just extremely high amounts of processed salt in the study. And when they did super high amounts, there was a slight correlation. But what they found was, and the amounts were just so far out there. So later on, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition and the American Journal of Medicine both did follow-up studies, and they found that you could have the highest blood pressure or the lowest blood pressure, depending on if you ate adequate amounts of calcium, potassium, magnesium to offset the sodium. So if you're eating a very processed food diet that's high in processed sodium and all of the terrible fats and terrible processed carbs that are with that salt, yeah, there is a problem. But you can also have people eating high amounts or low amounts, and it's really depending on the other electrolytes. And so you could fall into the higher blood pressure or the lower blood pressure groups, depending on the amount of calcium. Now, what's interesting is the thing that does impact blood pressure is sugar.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of studies now on sugar, and sugar has a very distinct relationship, and high amounts of processed sugar really does impact blood pressure, but the salt doesn't. In fact, when you go to the hospital, you get an IV of 0.9% saline solution, which is salt water, because that's an IV of sugar water, an IV of distilled water, an IV of Coca-Cola, coffee, tea, whatever, an IV of anything but either distilled or saline, which is 0.9%, or like lactated ringers, which is the sodium chloride with these other minerals, electrolytes. To balance that is what you get in an IV.
Right, exactly. So we can take away from this that salt is not unhealthy. Salt doesn't typically raise blood pressure, especially like you're saying when it's not processed salt and it's like sea salt, like the salt that Redmond has that has all the other electrolytes in it, or especially like these real lights, or like the sodium that you would be getting in food that would also have the other minerals in it, the potassium, the calcium, the chloride, the magnesium.
Yeah, one thing we've learned over time is that in our bodies, you take fat, and fat isn't fat, right? There's different types of fat. You take any particular thing, and there's different types. And so by just saying sodium is bad with a bad brush, that's a lot different than looking at natural salt the way it comes in the IV.
That's such a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. I talk about that a lot with fats, actually. That's, like for example, like yeah, fat isn't fat. Like these ultra processed seed oils and vegetable oils are so bad for us. But something like MCTs or monounsaturated fats from olive oil is obviously healthy. So yeah, that's a phenomenal point. I'm going to start using that comparison now. Someone did. Sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, there's this article, and I can send this to you. You can post it on your wall. But it says the wrong white crystals, not salt but sugar, as the
Ooh,
problem with hypertension. And
ooh,
but there's an interesting, and I'll
yes.
send this article. It's just it's a peer-reviewed medical journal. But there's one line in here that I really like, because it says that naturally occurring sugars, including fructose, seem to be benign in their usual biological context, in the context of the accompanying water, fiber, other carbohydrates, even fats and proteins that may be in the whole plant food. And so we know that sugar's bad, but
Wow.
even something like sugar, our bodies have to have sugar to survive. And we'll go into, hypoglycemia. I mean, we have to have sugar, but we don't need to be eating sugar cubes. There's a big difference in how the body reacts to different sugars and different fats and different salt.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Yeah, I'd love to read that. Yeah, definitely send that to me. Someone asked like what form of magnesium is in the relights. I guess like what are some of the other mineral salts that are in there?
So we add magnesium as magnesium citrate.
Cool.
And then, of course, in the real salt itself, there's over 60 trace minerals that occur in small amounts. Now, we don't disclose those on the label because, if you say, there is trace amounts of iodine in real salt, but if we put that on the supplement panel because it is
Right.
a controlled supplement, then you have to guarantee that amount. And because it's a trace naturally occurring, it might be big or small, and we can't guarantee that exact because we're not
Right.
putting it in. And so
Right.
we don't list that even though they're there. Then of course the potassium is also potassium citrate. And then we do coconut water powder. That's a great electrolyte as well. And then that's really all that's added outside of the stevia and a little bit of sweetener in the berry flavor.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I can't wait to try that. I'm gonna try that before I go to bed. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And this has been absolutely amazing. I love the content. I definitely want to do this again, Darryl. Like this is we covered a lot as far as salt being healthy for us and why Redmond is awesome. And I'm a huge fan of Redmond. I've literally been making my way through all of them today and enjoying them, not even putting them on food. Uh, and I do love everyone in the keto community, by the way, uses the heck out. It's almost like a secret handshake or something, like when they pull out the little pocket-sized ones. It's like, oh yeah, I'm in the club. Okay, cool. Like, oh, okay, you're a legitimate biohacker, faster, or keto person if you've got the little Redmond, little secret thing there. Like what you had it just a second ago.
That one
That one,
there.
yeah, exactly. Those things are amazing to travel with. Throw in your pocket. It makes you feel like you're not weird if like you pull that out of your pocket, like versus like pulling out like a big Redmond thing or
Yeah.
a yeah, exactly. Like
Is that a shaker in
you're
your
like, I
pocket?
got it. So
So one of
yeah,
the things that
uh,
obviously I'm a huge fan of the Redmond Real Salt. It's an amazing product and it's great. There's other great salts around the world. So sometimes I'll just leave you with this. People will ask, well, Darryl, if you didn't have real salt, I know you're biased, I know you like it, what salt would I choose? And really, I tell people, rather than looking at brands, look at 3 questions. And I think if you ask yourself these 3 questions, you will find an incredible salt, but you can also find great kale or great beef or great tenderloin or great eggs, whatever it is you're looking for to round out your diet. So the first is know who's producing it.
yeah,
In today's world, that's pretty tough sometimes because there is just so many items that are just dumped onto the open market. But by going to a farmer's market or just picking up the phone, know who is producing the product. When you know who's producing it, then you can ask the second question, which I think is really important, is where is it coming from? Know the source. Is it coming from, in the case of salt, is it coming from the Sea of Japan, the Gulf of Mexico? Is it coming from an ancient seabed? Is it coming from, just where is it coming from? Because that can tell us a lot about the product. Is it coming from a high density feedlot situation where the cows are all on top of each other when they're eating a grain-based diet, or are they getting grass-fed with plenty of space to roam? And so whatever it
right,
is, so know who's producing it, know the source, and then the last thing is what are they doing to it? Are they taking anything out? Are they putting anything in? And I
right.
think if you ask yourself those questions, whether it's eggs at the farmer's market, whether it's real salt, whether it's your favorite kombucha or whatever it is, I think if you can ask those 3 questions, whether it comes to salt or anything, rather than looking at brands, you will get a really good product. And that includes, looking at the label, being an informed consumer, but knowing the source, knowing who's producing it and what are they doing to it or taking out or putting in, I think you end up with a better product. And it might be our brand. I hope it is. If it's some other brand, that's great too.
That's amazing. When you email me that study, if you can email me those 3 things, that'd be great. I'm actually going to do a post on that. That's phenomenal. I totally agree. And I have been to your mines, and it was amazing to go not only blow stuff up with the guns and eat incredible steaks, but to go down into the mines and lick the walls and just and really see how it's made and to know it is American and from Utah and from a good family that has great values at that company. It's really amazing. Like it's a great product, but I love the culture around it. And to your points, like it's just an incredible company, and I fully support everything Redmond. So thank you for coming on. It was a great discussion on fasting and on salt and how those 2 worlds collide. So thank you so much, Darryl. Really appreciate you, and this is a great discussion.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I do got a jet, but really appreciate your time and all that you do to help encourage people to try fasting. And if it works, great. If not, keep trying. I do think you'll find some benefits in it. So anyway, thanks for having me on tonight. Sure enjoyed it, and hopefully we can do it again.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. See you, everyone. Thanks for coming on.